Porter Swentzell to join us. A lot of you may already know him. For a while he was doing tours at the Puye Cliffs, and I think I've heard from a lot of docents, or maybe some folks who weren't able to make it today, how fabulous an experience it is to hear Porter speak. And we actually finally made it up to Puye Cliffs with the docent group, but Porter was no longer there. So I thought I should find a way to have him come and speak to the docents. And he's actually this semester, is it the first semester to be teaching at, the third semester to be teaching at Northern New Mexico College. And I happened upon a flyer for some of the extracurricular or non-credit classes that he was offering, and found a way to track him down. And he also serves as a guide. He has his own tour company for people throughout northern New Mexico. So we're very lucky that he's here today, and we're very excited to have him. So please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm very honored to be here today and to join you and enjoy this excellent food. So now that we've eaten and are well fed, I expect to see some heads to start rolling around. If there's an occasional drool coming out, I don't mind at all. I won't be offended. Plus, it's so nice and warm in here as well, especially compared to outside. And so I'm glad you guys were able to survive the ice and the snow in order to be here. And I know the weather wasn't the best to make it here, but I'm extremely honored to be here. As Don said, my name is Porter Swentzell. I'm from Santa Clara Pueblo, winter person, currently adjunct faculty at Northern New Mexico College. Also a graduate student with Western New Mexico University, as down in Silver City. Have worked for a number of years as one of the managers at Puye Cliff Dwellings, but that's why you couldn't find me, because I'm no longer there. And so, but I still go and visit the Cliff Dwellings and visit the other guides that are there up at the Cliff Dwellings. There was a number of things that Don and I had talked about as far as presenting it, and of course the idea did come from Eva Archfager and the UNM Los Alamos and the advertising that was done there. Eva Archfager had contacted me to do some classes up there, or some sort of community education, because many of the people that live in Los Alamos, or spend time in Los Alamos, are not from the area, as many of us know. And also they are not very familiar with the area and of the cultural diversity that surrounds. Los Alamos is completely surrounded by incredible cultural diversity. So the goal of those classes was basically to kind of try to bring in some of those people that may be interested in all of the things that are surrounding them, yet are not aware of a way to sort of start to dig into that information or become aware of all of the things that are surrounding them. And I have to admit, the class did not, one class made, but the other classes didn't make, so it was kind of a moot point. So we'll see if they are interested in learning more in the future. But I would like to expand on that sort of idea of cultural education in my talk today. And of course, we'll have some time at the end for some questions or comments and things of that nature. And what I really want to talk about today is the work that I do now, which is completely connected with the work I did as a supervisor at Puye Cliff Dwellings. And I am part of the Humanities and Social Sciences Department, and also part of the Pueblo Indian Studies program at Northern New Mexico. Northern has the only Pueblo Indian Studies program anywhere. And I happen to be the very first graduate of that program. There's two graduates now, And so it's not a very big program. About 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, it got started. It came out of the Northern Pueblos Institute, which was set up by my aunt, Tessie Naranjo, and Sue Ellen Jacobs, who had set it up back in the 90s. And so their sort of goal was trying to find ways to promote Pueblo education, or in this case, the sort of cultural element of Pueblo education. And I had left Albuquerque. I was going to UNM and had my first kid. And so I tried to keep going to school after that, but ended up that I needed to take care of my responsibilities, and I couldn't do it while I was going to school. So I said, well, I moved back to Santa Clara and raise my kids and not have to worry about education ever again. That's it. I'm done with that. So I returned back to Santa Clara, was continuing to make ends meet over there. My aunt said, you know what, you should check out these classes because, well, the main reason was that they needed to increase the enrollment. So, hey, you can sign up, but you don't have to show up or anything. You know? Just sign up so we can make the class go through. So I signed up and kind of went just for out of curiosity, you know, and eventually ended up sticking around and going through the whole program. And of course, now I am an instructor in that program. So there's something to be said for institutional nepotism. But connected with some family nepotism in there. But to me, it's become larger than just something that's interesting or something that's unique, but something that's very vital and important as we think of preserving and perpetuating Pueblo culture in the coming decades, in the coming centuries. Because for thousands of years, we have figured out a way to pass down our culture, our traditions, our languages in ways that have served the test of time, or proved the test of time, and all the way to this modern day. You can start to see, you know, at first with the assimilation policies, federal government, but really we can see the assimilation, the acculturation speeding up under the Indian New Deal. John Collier, despite his intentions, and of course the enormous impact that we see World War II having on Pueblo communities, on Pueblo culture. And now that we're down the stretch, we can see how truly important the period of World War II was and the impact that it had on our communities today. We're seeing a loss of language, you know, a decline in culture. Yes, we're still very strong, and we still have many of the traditions that were still passed down. But it is a point in time where it is a serious concern about whether these things that were passed down for untold generations will still continue to be passed down for untold generations. And it comes to a point in time where you can't just trust the mechanisms that have held us up for all this time, and we have to start thinking of new, or we have to start thinking outside the box about ways that we can continue to preserve these things that were passed down to us. And that's really at the heart of the Pueblo Indian Studies program at Northern. And one of the things that sort of brought this home for me is that working as a supervisor at Puye Cliff Dwellings, I was in charge of training the tribal guides coming in. So, you know, we come in and have an interview with them and talk, well, what do you know, what do you know, you know. And many times it was sort of surprising to see how little they knew. How little they knew about not only their own traditional history, their own traditional understanding of Puye, and Puye is our last direct place of inhabitants. You know, it's like the last house you lived in. You know, and so it's not something that comes from the far distant past. It's really, you know, right there in our history. You know, and so many of the guides were the younger generation. You know, that wanted just a quick summer job. You know, earn some cash over the summertime. Yet they were not coming in with that kind of knowledge. Forget the knowledge that you share with the public, but just even the knowledge that you hold to yourself that isn't shared with the public. And so me and the other managers and some of the elders that were also working there at that time, all were sort of worried about this aspect, saying, how do we, how can we be sharing our traditional history, our understanding of our past, if our own people don't even know it? How do we make sure that our own people know all of this as well? And so one of the things, of course, was just training the guides, themselves, kind of a new way of passing on that information through the workplace, you could call it, But at the same time, the real incentive to be there was to be earning money, So there was a whole spectrum of people that don't really care. They just wanted to, tell jokes and maybe get a good tip, and people that were truly interested. Fortunately, most of the people are very interested in learning about their past and also sharing what they did know about their past with the outside world. And so that was a positive thing to come from that. But when we made calls out to the community, to bring in community members, to elders to share that information, younger people to come in to partake in that sharing for their own benefit, those calls tended to fall on dead ears, And so it comes around to being, well, the people who want to know, the ones who want to know, are already out there seeking that information, asking their grandparents, asking their great uncles and aunts, how was it that we lived in the past? How did they do this? Why did we live here? Where did we live there before? And so those people already exist, regardless of Puye Cliff Dwellings and the guides over there. Many of those people don't work there. But we also notice that many of the people who are trying to kind of improve their lives economically through attaining education, yet we're still very much tied to the traditional lifestyle in the village. Their only choice for education, or one of the only choices, was Northern New Mexico College. So while they're there earning a degree in business or learning a degree in education or whatever, they can take classes that talk about the history. And we're talking about two kinds of history here. The Western kind of idea of a chronological history, but we give the fair sort of share to the traditional idea of history, a secular view of history that isn't chronological, that isn't based on dates, And so this is the kind of thing that we would like to share. Classes like table ethnobiology, Pueblo history, arts and crafts, all these sorts of things that are not only there to educate, anybody can take these classes, so the information is available to those who are interested, but also the Pueblo scholar, the people who are interested in this material and aren't able to get it from their homes, from their own relatives, have another way to acquire this information. One of the things that is very important also is that we think of education as sort of from the Western paradigm, you could say, where in a way it's sort of a process of acquiring knowledge. So you're just trying to get information. And with the Pueblos, the problem with that is that we've been faced with that sort of paradigm in the past, with you could say the anthropologists, the turn of the 19th and 20th century, coming in and trying to extract that information. Say, give us all your information that you got, and so we can take it and put it in a book. And many of them were also concerned about cultural preservation. They said the Pueblos are going to disappear, and we got to quickly write it down before they do. I don't think they anticipated that we would last longer than what they thought, but they were concerned about some of the same things that we're concerned about, but they were doing it in a very sort of Western way, which is to go and grab that information and collect it together. Well, the way that we operate is not on a sort of knowledge-seeking methodology. We work in the Pueblos, work on a tiered knowledge system. So as you grow older in life, you may begin to learn something more and more as you grow older. By the time you're 60, 70 years old, you may know a great deal about some things, but not about everything. But a young person will know not very much about anything. And so it's not based on what degree that you hold, but it's based on a lifetime of participation, a lifetime of being involved in the traditional life, a lifetime of participation, knowing the language, hearing the stories, things of that nature. And the key to how this is different from the Western idea of education is, I like to break it down in this way, is that the sort of outside world thinks that if you have knowledge, then you will have respect. So if I know a whole lot about you or your culture, then I will know that I can have respect for you. And ours is the reverse way. It says we must have respect all the time, and then maybe you may actually learn something from that, you know. And I remember growing up, the worst thing that you could ever do was to ask questions. Say, don't ever ask any questions, ever. You know, say, go get this tool from the shed, you know, and you don't even know what tool that is, you know. So you go in there and you're like, well, maybe this is it, or maybe that's it, or I don't know. So you come back with something, say, go get that tool from the shed. You know, go back and you're like, oh, no, that's not it. Which one is it, you know? Come back with 5 of them, say, which one is it, you know? But the process of learning was to observe, to listen, to, you know, pay close attention, and then try it yourself. Don't ask, how do you do that, or why are you doing that, or anything like that. Watch, observe them, have a great deal of respect for what they're doing, and then maybe you can try it on your own. And from that process, over and over again, you may actually acquire the same skills yourself. And so this is the same idea of the education, whether it's from the traditional aspect, you know, the learning of traditional parts of Pueblo life, or learning the history or anything like that, is that it's not about getting all the information down and then you memorize it. You know, it's about carefully watching those who have gone before, who have figured it out in the same kind of way, and figuring it out on your own terms as well. I remember an older man from the village used to go to my great uncle. Maybe it's not enough greats. Anyway, my very great uncle, who was still alive when I was young. And he would go over there, and of course they were friends, and he would tell a story, a traditional Tewa story about the past. And it would take 45 minutes straight telling that story. And then he would, at the end, come to the end and say, now it's your turn. You know? And then he has to start telling the story. If he messed it up by one little word, say, stop. And then he starts telling the story all the way over again, from the start to the end, you know, word for word, this way that he had learned it. They say, now it's your turn again, you know. And you could try again to replicate that. So, you know, when we're talking about oral traditions, you know, it works in a very different sort of way than what you normally see in an American or European classroom, you know. And so with that in mind, when you're trying to give credence not only to the Western idea of history or ethnobiology or, you know, arts and crafts and the idea that we surround art with, you know, but you're trying to encapsulate some of that traditional ways of learning, those two ideas kind of come clashing at each other, you know. How do you have a classroom where, you know, questions aren't necessarily expected, you know? Or one of the things that, you know, you learn in college, upper level classes is sort of this Socratic method, the seminar, you know, tutorial, you know, where you have this sort of shared dialogue, question and answer, and seeking of the truth, right? And that somehow you would sort of resolve an issue that way. Well, you know, in a room like this, if we're having a meeting, you know, trying to figure out some sort of issue, like maybe how are we going to salt the roads or clear the roads away, right? So first off, we would set some of the benchmarks for that meeting by saying to you guys, say, first off, don't forget that everyone who has ever existed is here with you right now. Because you're here and you are the product of all those people that ever existed before you, they are also here with you. So you have to think about what they would want you to do at this point in time. So that's kind of a big guilt trip. But it does give you a good idea to start thinking from. And then say also, don't forget that everything you do from now on may change everything that will ever happen from here on out. So think about that very carefully, and of course, then the next thing then would be to open up the discussion. But it's not just let's fire away and whoever gets their first jabs in can dominate it. But really, it's this idea based on the tiered knowledge system that the oldest people who have experienced a great deal in their life and who probably also have then, of course, acquired more knowledge than the younger people go ahead and speak first, And then the goal is not to counter them, say, I don't agree with you, have a debate, but say, I agree with you, add your own bit that maybe just adds, but doesn't counter what they have said, and goes down to the younger generations. So it's not this sort of Socratic method, it's a consensus building method. So these kind of ideas that how do you apply this idea, to an education system, it provides a great deal of challenge, But the real key to why would you even do this, is because of those issues that modern day tribes are facing. A couple of years ago at my village, Santa Clara, they did a language survey at the day school. Out of the 120 some students that are at that school, this is K through 6, only one student was fluent in Tewa. I've heard other pueblos that their fluent speakers are dropping down into the single digits for some of the smaller villages. So, the pueblos have always had a reputation for their strong maintenance of tradition and culture and language. And yes, in comparison to some of the other tribes out there, they're holding on to that very strongly. There are many Tewa speakers. The traditions and culture are very much still alive, But it does come to a point where you have to expand, as I said in the beginning, the area, the sort of box that you permit education to take place in. For many years, people say, we can't write the language because it's a language, it's a religious language, and we can't have the outside world becoming aware of that language. So you must teach it in the home. Well, that's how it's worked out for centuries, but to today now, that's not working the same way that it used to work. What do you do now? Maybe you do need to start to think about writing the language down, creating grammars, creating a structured environment for people to learn in. The other thing is to say, our young people are not the same kind of young people that existed in 1880, 1780, 1480, 1080. They're not the same kind of people. They have been, in many ways, acculturated to the outside world. You walk into any Pueblo house today and you have a TV going and the kids are on whatever thing you can hand it and do that with, a cell phone or the gaming systems or whatnot. They already, that's what they're aware of. They picked up all these things immediately. I see it with my own kids, It took me years and years to figure out how to turn a computer on and off. And my youngest kids don't even know how to read, and they can operate the whole thing and find things that I didn't even know you could find without reading. It's kind of scary. But this is the kind of world that we're in, and they have all gone through the Western education system. That is the way that they have become accustomed to learning, They have had it pounded into them of this Western style of education. So for them to learn a language in the way that we might learn French or Spanish or German or any other kind of foreign language is something that we will have to think about for our own people, And it's something that you don't want to really be announcing in a sort of, we're going to learn it that way, because it is sort of embarrassing that it's gotten to this point. But at the same time, you have to think about what are we going to do about those coming after us, you know? What are we going to say that, well, you know what, we decided that we couldn't write it down, so we just decided that we'll let it go away, you know, because for a number of reasons, these things are not working anymore, you know. Or, you know, what happens when you get to the point where you have no more fluent speakers, you know, things of that nature. Who are going to stand up to be the tribal leaders, the governors, the council people, who are going to be there to be the traditional leaders, you know. And the important thing to me is that this is personal, because to me, this is the result of thousands of years of people who worked hard, who shed their blood, who struggled against unknown odds to manage to have us be here today, you know. And the lessons that they passed down to us from the beginning of time to teach us how to be human beings, how to lay the path down as human beings. These are lessons that are vitally important for us to keep passing down. Who will pass those down to my grandkids, my great-grandkids, if I don't do something about it? You know, and say all of these thousands of years that people have been passing this down, now it is in our hands to carry this on as well. And for me, that lesson in itself also is the reason why we should and can have this in a sort of college environment, because to me it's very important to challenge all of the students, whether they're from the Pueblos, whether they're from other tribes, the local Hispanos, Espanola Valley, which is most of the student population, saying, you know, you are the result of everybody that came before you. They shed the strength of their arms, the strength of their legs, the strength of their breath, the strength of their hearts, so that you could be here today. And really, if you think about it, and something I like to challenge everybody to, is that really all of humanity is in your hands. You exist here today because you are also the result of everybody that came before, but all of the future is in your hands as well. And so every action that you do changes everything that happens from this time forward. And so these are why, to me, it's a personal thing, because it's not just a contest for cultural preservation, but it's a contest for preserving a way of thinking about the world, a way that's not just important for Pueblo people, but I think is vitally important to all people around the world, and of course, I think valuable for humanity as a whole. And that, you know, this is the kind of attitudes that will see us on in future years. And that's, of course, my opinion, but I think it is important, and why this is a personal thing to me. Now, with sharing information, you have to think about, you know, what are the things, what are the lines that allow us, you know, to talk about certain things and not talk about other things. And so it is very important, and I always emphasize that, you know, there are some things that can only be passed down within their village, that can only be passed down in the correct cultural context that they're supposed to be passed down. But there's a whole lot of other stuff that isn't passed down in that context that can get passed down in an academic environment, you know. And those are also things that many of them we can share with the outside world. And so going back to the very beginning and the feast days, one of the things that they had asked me to sort of give a overview of is the Pueblo feast days. And these are kind of the public side of Pueblo traditions that the outside world can actually see. Of course, there's some other events through the year that the outside public can see. But, you know, part of the thing, the key is, of course, these are open to the public, but the key is to go back to something that I talked about in the beginning, which is that to always have respect first. If you have respect, you will encounter no problems, you know. So that's usually where the problems come about, those people who are unaware of the fact that they do have to come with this particular attitude, set of behaviors. Otherwise they could run into some trouble. And so these are the kind of things that to share with the public is, and it's sort of counterintuitive because they say, well, we expect you to already pay attention and notice that you aren't supposed to do X, Y, and Z, but that's the rest of the world has been trained that you have to be told, and then you have to ask questions, and then get this told back to you, and on and so forth. And our expectations is that you would just notice, that you would just notice that nobody is going and walking across there, or notice that nobody's standing on that rock, or on and so forth, And so it is a little bit difficult in the sense that we have to go against our own grain of thought and say, okay, you can't have your cell phone, you can't draw pictures, you can't record, and things of that nature, But despite all of the rules that exist out there, and there's more rules that are happening all of the time, of course. Anybody who's gone to feast days over the last couple decades notice that things are always changing. But that this sort of is a first step into seeing a part of Pueblo culture, And so if you haven't gone to a feast day before, I would suggest, that you go visit, with that attitude of respect. And by observing and seeing what the participants are doing, without asking any questions, just listen, with your ears and watch the movements, breathe the air that's coming at that time, and you may actually begin to understand something. Probably you may even begin to understand something that dozens of anthropologists could never figure out. And that's something that really is personal and that you take with you when you're there. Another thing is that none of these activities take place in a vacuum. Your presence there means that you're part of the activities that are going on that day. So it's not like an observer and an audience and show kind of thing. You are actually part of the whole thing that's going there, And so whether you're from that village or not, you are part of those activities. And so that's why, again, we say, you have to be respectful. It's as if, this kind of looks like a church, but if you showed up to church and everybody had to give the sermon all together, that's the kind of thought that's going on there. There's not an audience and the preacher, but everybody is part of the experience of that day. And so with that, I would like to open it up to any comments, questions, observations. Yeah.
I think your concern is extremely real, and what you're doing is terrific. Can an Anglo participate?
A lot of these things are sort of difficult because of the internal politics of everything. For example, we have northern New Mexico is particularly connected with the 8 northern pueblos, although we have students from almost every tribe in the Southwest. But that out of those 8 northern, 2 of them speak Northern Tiwa and 6 of them speak Tewa. And then there's dialects in the Tewa language as well. So when you're talking, each of those villages has a different policy to language education, different policies about where they draw the line. And some of the pueblos say, you can't talk about anything. It's the kind of thing, don't even mention anything, And so you see a very hardline approach from some of the villages. Some of the other villages are, they're making apps for Tewa language, for the cell phone. So, and they're kind of all in their own little insulated villages. So these guys are like, no, we're not going to let anybody know anything about anything. And those guys 5 miles over there are making Android apps for the language, So you're thinking, wow, it's mutually intelligible, So anybody could get a hold of that and they have that. And over here you're saying, no, we've kept it under wraps, And so there's a disconnect from the policies. And when you're trying to get 8 different villages together in order to agree on something as simple as just teaching the language. It can be tricky. So I have to credit the tact of my aunt, Tessie Naranjo, and Sue Ellen Jacobs for managing to even have the program exist in the first place. Because for the program to even exist in the first place is very difficult. But of course, now the current director is Dr. Matthew Martinez, and some of you may know who he is. And so there is some work that, he's trying to figure out a way to, include language and things like that in a way that at least some Pueblos can agree with, As for the outside world, of course, one of the things that's really important is just, not asking any of you to do this, but it is kind of good to raise awareness that this program exists, that these things are going on. Because actually in northern New Mexico is kind of a no-name place still yet, and hardly anybody knows about the program or any of the things going on. So in a case like this, it'd be valuable actually to raise awareness of that. And I would like to see that graduates from the program come to places like Museum of Indian Arts and Crafts, the Will Wright Museum, the state archives, and that those people that are trained, not only in their own history, but the traditional history, and have been taught to think about these kind of things, are involved in places that it matters, that those, and they're coming from their actual home communities as well. And so it'd be nice to see more of that involvement down the road, yeah. So hope that kind of answers your question a little bit, yeah.
Can your traditions and your religious foundation exist without language?
That's a key problem, is because the language is not just everyday language, but it's the language of religion, right? And so in the traditional setting, that is the language that must be used. So if you don't have speakers, or if the people don't understand the language, or you can see where this is going, then you have a really big problem. So it's not just language, but it's the entire thing is interconnected. These aren't separate ideas, So. Okay, well, thank you all very much. And if you have any questions, you can ask me afterwards. Thank you all very much for allowing me to be here. Thank you.